Heading to the notary with her son, the daughter of a wealthy man caught sight of her husband with his mistress. Learning what her father had bequeathed to her, Emily didn't feel like going to the notary's office, especially with William to take care of. He was only 7 years old. Despite his young age, she still worried. "Mama, where are we going? To the store? Or to the park? I'd like to go there. There are squirrels jumping, wild ducks, swans," William asked along the way. Emily smiled. "No, sweetheart, we're going to Uncle Notary's office to claim Grandpa James's inheritance." "Well, my dad's, that is." "Oh, I see. Well, not quite, but sort of." "Mom, is Grandpa James in heaven already?" William asked again. Emily shrugged. "I think so. He never harmed anyone, helped little houses, homeless animals." William nodded in agreement but continued the conversation nonetheless. "Is it because of Grandpa that homeless dogs walk around with those yellow tags?" "Yes, it means the dog is vaccinated and poses no threat to people. And it doesn't just wander around the city, it walks near the shelter." William dreamily thought about someday having his own dog. Meanwhile, Emily was preoccupied with thoughts of the impending conversation with the notary. What could she possibly learn there, especially when her dad was gone for good? That remained the most painful topic for her. Why did she have to deal with all this business now? Especially since she had always dreamed of a life tied to a beauty salon or, at worst, a restaurant. And here she was, running a construction firm. Its intricacies, many of which remained a mystery to her. On the other hand, she had no choice. She had to step up. It was a necessary procedure. Oh, and how untimely everything turned out. One thing after another, like some kind of curse. And then there was the divorce with Oscar, but it all added up. Her husband showed his true colors. The moment her father passed away, he immediately took up with his mistress, openly, shamelessly, something he would never have dared under James's watch. He was afraid. Understandably so. James Albertson was feared by many, his character alone was intimidating. And he had a sharp business sense. In case of need, he could handle any situation better than any snake. But everything has its time. And a month ago, Emily and her stepmother, Olivia, learned the tragic news. A treacherous heart attack, brought on by overwork, business trips, negotiations, and endless business trips. All for the home, all for the family. Emily sighed sadly and crossed the street to where the notary's office was located. In better times, she could have used a car, but at the moment she didn't have that option. Shortly before James Albertson's tragic departure, a glitch appeared in his previously thriving business. Thus, Emily had to sell her personal car to help her father settle his debts at least partially. Of course, she didn't regret selling the car one bit. One could live quite decently without it, and it wasn't the main issue. William's voice pulled Emily out of her gloomy thoughts. "Mama, look, Daddy's car is parked, the red one," he said. Emily startled and looked in the direction her son indicated. Indeed, it was Oscar's foreign car. He never hesitated to spend money on their purchase. He loved living lavishly. And why should he be ashamed? He used to be afraid of his father-in-law, but now he was knee-deep in trouble. Ignoring her son's remark, Emily started climbing the stairs. William obediently followed, still not fully understanding what was happening. But when Emily opened the door to the notary's office, she froze in astonishment. In front of her, embracing another long-legged babe, stood her Oscar. "Oh, here comes Emily. And Sophie and I have been here for ages." "The early bird catches the worm," Oscar remarked. "Well, it's easy to be early when you're not footing the bill," Emily retorted, making Oscar snort indignantly. "And whose bill is that? Your father also left me something. I practically lived with you for 5 years. More like endured. But that's beside the point. Your dad decided to thank me for putting up with such a shrew for so many years. My mom is not a shrew, and you're a traitor." William exclaimed angrily, stomping his foot. Oscar smirked. Oh, the defender is growing up. Well, I always said, kids from the orphanage never become family. Emily glared at her husband with hatred. Who put those words in your mouth? Don't you have anyone else to talk to? William is my son, period. I couldn't care less about your speculations. Well, that's your business. I always voice my opinion. Not like you and your daddy. Always playing spies, coming up with schemes, and look where it got you, Oscar remarked with undisguised irony. His companion chuckled in agreement and gave Emily a disdainful look. How dare you speak about my father like that? If it weren't for him, you'd still be a laborer on the construction site. Who made you a foreman? Who taught you everything? Emily exclaimed. The situation in the notary's office was reaching its boiling point, and the conversation threatened to escalate into a full-blown scandal at any moment. At that moment, the door to the office swung open, and the elderly notary assumed the role of an arbitrator. All right, folks, stop arguing. I must point out that notary offices are the least suitable place for such scenes, although I understand the state of both sides. Therefore, to avoid further unnecessary speculation, I'll say everything up front. James Albertson has left all his business and financial assets to Oscar Barlow. The late Olivia Albertson's husband, Olivia, is left with all the real estate, including the coastal cottage. Taken aback by the unexpected news, Emily stood frozen in place, as if rooted to the spot. Obviously, the experienced notary deliberately laid it all out at once to nip family discord in the bud. What? All the business and assets to whom? To this scoundrel? That womanizer? Emily exclaimed, her cheeks flushing with excitement. I guess you mean yourself, sweetheart. You're nobody now. But my Oscar, a wealthy heir, Sophie remarked. Oscar smirked and challengingly looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife. Technically, they hadn't divorced yet, but it was only a matter of time. Her father's premature departure prevented Emily from carrying out her plans. She had wanted to divorce Oscar half a year ago, but something always got in the way, one thing or another. They weren't living together by that time anyway, and everyone knew they would never have a solid marriage. And now Emily learned that her beloved father had left all his savings to Oscar. It was unthinkable. What was the deceased businessman thinking? Could he have been under some kind of hypnosis? Or, even worse, coerced? Emily didn't have an answer to that question. Emily Albertson, why are you silent? You're entitled to something too. Your late father didn't forget about you, the notary interjected. Emily looked up and met the gaze of the elderly man. And what do I get? The notary adjusted his horn-rimmed glasses on his nose and replied impartially, you inherit the country house along with the adjacent land and outbuildings. A tense pause filled the office. It seemed even the secretary froze, stopping her typing on the keyboard. Initially, Emily thought she misheard and misunderstood the notary's words, but when she asked again, her mood plummeted even further. Oh, God, is this what my father was thinking when he wrote his will? Flashed through the young woman's mind. Not knowing what house was being referred to, William pressed closer to his mother, looking distressed at everyone present. Well, Emily, happy with your inheritance? Did Daddy hit the mark, or not? Oscar sneered. He hit it, Oscar, he hit it right on the money, Emily replied with a trembling voice. Her ex-husband smirked. I bet you haven't even seen the house. But I have. Let me tell you, it's not much to look at. The house is on the verge of collapse, like a house of cards. A barn, a well in the yard, dreams, not inheritance. Well, I'm glad you liked it. All right, let's go. Farewell, Emily replied with a trembling voice, taking the documents and keys from the notary's desk and leaving the office with William. Once outside, she covered her face with her hands and quietly cried. Mom, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Everything's okay, isn't it? Or are you upset about that house? The little boy asked anxiously. Emily shook her head despondently. What could she say to her son? That his grandfather left him without an inheritance? It's hard to believe even for herself, let alone for a little child to grasp. And Emily was sure her father would leave his property to her, yet he gave all the real estate to Olivia. How long had she been with him? 10 years? Not too long, no matter how you slice it, but she waited for her turn. And what was she to do with William? Living with her stepmother, Emily couldn't bear, primarily because of Olivia herself, who took an instant dislike to her stepdaughter. Yet Emily never sought conflict with this fatal beauty. If her father chose her, then he knew what he was doing. He must have had his reasons. Having lived in James's house for about a year, Olivia began gradually asserting her rules. Initially, she ousted Emily from the kitchen, not allowing her to cook. Sorry, dear, but I'm tired of your cooking. Why stand by the stove for hours when you can order delivery from a restaurant? Olivia would say, making it clear to Emily that her presence was unwanted. Emily looked hopefully at her father, but he pretended not to notice and continued focusing on what he excelled at, running the business. Emily, on the other hand, managed his charitable foundations and helped those in need. She remembered the way from the notary's office poorly. What was she thinking? What was she planning? No one could say except for herself. William obediently walked beside her, trying not to bother his mom with questions. The smart boy understood that something strange had happened that morning, something that would change their lives beyond recognition. And when Emily opened the door to their parents' house, she felt uneasy. The thing was, she saw an unfamiliar man in the living room, about 50 years old, with whom her stepmother cooed like a lovebird. And it had only been a month since her father's departure. How could they? Shamelessly, cynically, without any respect for the deceased's feelings. Seeing Emily, Olivia barely suppressed a smug smirk. At some point, Emily even thought that her stepmother knew about the will. That's why she behaved so shamelessly and provocatively. Look at her, arranging a romantic rendezvous here. Wine, restaurant dishes on the table. Probably celebrating the inheritance, Emily thought, then added, addressing William. Sweetie, we're leaving. Pack your things in your backpack, and I'll start packing the suitcases. The boy looked at his mom with surprise. Leaving? But where to? To the countryside. To where Grandpa left us the inheritance. What else is there to do? Emily replied with a trembling voice. William nodded in agreement and then ran to his room to pack. Emily, are you leaving somewhere? Olivia asked with a slightly tipsy voice. Yes, we're leaving. There's nothing left for us to do here. Oh, should I help you? Call a taxi or something, the stepmother persisted. No, thanks. Am I really so stupid that I can't call a taxi myself? Snapped Emily. It took them about half an hour to pack. Emily felt like she was acting against herself and the circumstances that forced her to look at the situation from a completely different angle. After all, she had thought that her father would leave the business and all financial assets to her. That's what everyone does. They leave the best to their children, grandchildren, but here everything went completely differently. Instead of helping his own daughter, James Albertson handed everything over to his wayward son-in-law. Or maybe it was because he always wanted a son. He saw in Oscar a successor, but it would be hard to find a worse candidate for this role. Pushing aside her gloomy thoughts, Emily picked up one suitcase and headed for the exit, where an elderly taxi driver was already waiting for them in a noticeable yellow car. Emily gave him the address. All right, of course. Please have a seat. I'll make sure everything's in order, the driver bustled. Emily nodded and sat in the back seat with William. She roughly knew the direction of the village she needed, not far from the city. A river, a small forest, and vast fields where local farmers' land stretched. With his face pressed against the window, William watched the road, exclaiming every time a huge truck passed by. Truth be told, the boy had never ventured beyond the city limits, so his amazement was so sincere that Emily couldn't help but smile. And are you going to the village permanently or just for a visit? The taxi driver asked. Emily shrugged uncertainly. I don't know, we'll see how it goes, maybe permanently. The driver exclaimed in surprise, oh, I've been there many times. There's no better place for relaxation. Mushrooms, fishing, and the land is so fertile that anything you plant will grow. Yeah, we're not really attached to the land. I was actually studying to be a teacher, but never worked a day in school. Dad wanted to turn me into a businesswoman, but it didn't work out, Emily replied, feeling embarrassed. Well, that's fixable. Where there's a will, there's a way, the driver said encouragingly. Yeah, nothing's set in stone. We'll see when we get there, Emily concluded. The road smoothly receded into the distance, like a ribbon unfolding in the wind. It's good to travel. They arrived in the village only in the afternoon. The locals greeted the conspicuous taxi with caution. After all, the settlement was relatively small, and every new guest was a reason for discussion and detailed analysis. Seeing the typical low houses with pitched roofs and small windows, Emily visibly sagged. After all, she imagined this settlement a little differently. Dogs barked, geese lazily wandered through the yards, hurrying to snatch food and grass from the chickens. After giving the taxi driver the necessary house number, Emily froze in surprise. As it turned out, Oscar hadn't lied when he said that the house looked old and dilapidated over the years without repair. Mom, are we going to live here now? William asked incredulously. Yes, honey, not only live, but maybe work too. Well, at least I will, Emily replied, surprising the elderly taxi driver. If you need anything, just let me know. I'll leave you my number just in case, the driver said, handing over a folded piece of paper from his notepad. Thank you, Emily replied, then paid the fare. Fortunately, the driver helped her carry the heavy suitcases to the door. All right, I've helped as much as I can. Take care, he said. Goodbye, Uncle Taxi Driver, come again. William called after the man. Emily smiled and was about to insert the key into the lock when the door opened by itself. Surprised, William jumped back. Mom, is there a ghost living there? But Emily couldn't answer her son's question because she herself didn't know who was lurking in the semi-darkness of the hallway. Hey, who's there? Come out, or I'll call the police, the woman exclaimed, trying to inject the necessary threat into her voice. The only response was a barely audible old man's wheeze, and then a weak male voice said, Oh, come on, dearies, what police? We only have one constable for the whole district. If you call, you'll wait until evening, maybe even until the next morning. It's hit or miss. And who are you, Grandpa? The house spirit? William preempted his mom with the question. The elderly man chuckled. Oh, come on, buddy. What house spirit? I'm George Blair, the former headmaster of the village school. And now, just an unwanted pensioner, spending his days in this house. Emily paled. But what about the inheritance then? This is my late father's house, James Albertson. I have all the documents for it, and the keys, everything according to the law. George Blair finally emerged from the shadows of the house, revealing himself to be a slender man in his 80s. What's this? James passed away. And I knew nothing about it. Lord, how sad. He was such a good man, kind, fair. Seeing tears stream down the man's cheeks, Emily cautiously asked, Did you know my dad personally? George Blair sadly shook his head. Of course, I did. I not only knew him but practically raised him. I taught him math in school. Then algebra, geometry. James always had a bright mind. Rest in peace. And you must be his daughter? Emily looked visibly embarrassed. Yes, George Blair, I'm Emily, and this is my son William. The old man's face brightened. What a good boy. You can see he's a chip off the old block. He'll grow up smart. I have an eye for these things. In the old days, I could tell a student's abilities at first glance. Thank you, we appreciate it very much, Emily replied reservedly, not wanting to discuss with the old man that William wasn't her biological son but an adopted one. The subject was touchy, and she didn't want to discuss it in the presence of a stranger. Don't worry, Emily. I'll clear out of the house today so as not to bother you and William. James allowed me to stay here once upon a time, but I guess I've overstayed my welcome. Time to move on, George added, for some reason, and went to pack his things. At that moment, Emily felt a sharp pang of conscience. It wasn't right to kick the man out of the house when he had nowhere else to go. Wait, George, don't leave. Stay with us. If Dad wanted you to live here, then let it be so. The old man looked at Emily skeptically. Oh, come on, you don't mean that. You'll be living here as a family. Why burden yourself with an old man like me? I have my own issues to deal with. But I get a decent pension, by the way. So if you need anything, I can help. Well, that's great. Since you don't mind, then stay forever. We don't know anyone in the village. You'll be our guide, Emily concluded with a smile, tactfully avoiding the question about her husband. What else could she say? She still hadn't divorced her unfaithful husband, who, on top of everything, squandered her father's inheritance. No, Emily had no complaints against the law. And where would they come from when everything was properly documented? Thank you, Emily. You're a kind soul. You took me in, didn't let me wander the world. My daughter-in-law kicked me out of the house after her son died. Not right away, of course, gradually. First, she kicked me out of my room, then made me move to the living room, then to the summer kitchen, and from there, the path to homelessness was open. What a disgrace. A former school principal. I even worked until the end of my career, until my health started failing, lamented George Blair. Emily frowned. How can you kick an elderly person out of the house? You could call the police. Oh, sorry, forgot. Or the local constable. George Blair waved his hand dismissively. Oh, come on, Emily, what's the point of that now? I've changed my mind about many things lately. And I don't blame my daughter-in-law. God will judge her. Thank you for letting me see my grandchildren occasionally. She wanted to put me in a nursing home, you know, for people like me, old folks, in general. And I refused. I can't live without kids. Every year on September 1st, I come and cry. I look and cry. Why are you crying, Grandpa? Is something hurting you? Or do you not like school? Asked William. George Blair smiled and wiped away a tear. Oh, I'm crying out of joy, grandson, for the kids going to school. When I see the school uniforms, my heart aches. They wanted to shut down our school 5 years ago, saying it's too old, but I fought back. I even went to the city, wrote complaints and petitions. Thanks to the late James, he helped with transportation, and he was just a good man in general. Emily looked at the elderly man with respect, then suggested they go inside the house. To her surprise, inside was spotless. Not a speck of dust, no cobwebs or musty smell. Everything was clean, washed, as if before an inspection. An old man, and such perfect order, Emily couldn't help but envy. William also liked the house, which seemed to him like the dwelling of a kind wizard from a fairy tale. As it turned out later, all this time George Blair had been staying in a tiny room, hesitating to occupy the whole house. How about work here in general? Can you find something suitable? Emily asked. Well, it depends on what you need. What's your calling, so to speak? You could work at the post office or get a job on a farm as a milker or at a poultry farm. And if your education allows, go to the school, Emily. We're short of teachers. Because of this, the new principal keeps bringing up talks of shutting it down, as if he doesn't understand that not everyone in the family has transportation to get there, George Blair replied fervently. School? That suits me. True, I've never worked in my field, But wasn't it a waste to study for so many years in pedagogy? Emily said with a smile. Wow! My mom will become a teacher. William exclaimed joyfully. Now that's something. I think the local school will be very happy to have you, noted George Blair. Well, that's still up in the air. They might not even take me, or I might not be able to work. Who knows, life can be unpredictable, after all. George smiled, then started setting the table to feed the guests from the road. Shortly before their arrival, he boiled potatoes and made a salad of cucumbers and tomatoes. Of course, nothing fancy, but when your stomach growls with hunger, it's just what you need. Here, eat up, all homegrown. It may be small, but it's a provider. I take care of the land, fertilize it with manure and compost in the fall. This way, I prepare my meal for a whole week. How much do I need there? A couple of potatoes, a cucumber, and that's our rustic food, George said with concern. Oh, it's delicious, Grandpa George. You could lick your fingers, said William with his mouth full. The elderly man smiled. Eat, eat, you need to grow, and you're quite skinny. Although your grandfather James was just like that. And then in high school, he built up his body, started doing sports. Emily lowered her eyes again, embarrassed. No, she considered William her own son, period. There couldn't even be any discussions. She took the little boy from the nursery almost 7 years ago. William's mother, for some reason, abandoned him, and Emily had long dreamed of having a child. In fact, doctors gave her their verdict 3 years ago when it turned out during the examination that she couldn't have children. Emily had to make the decision to adopt little William almost single-handedly, as there was no hope for support from Oscar. The situation was further complicated by the fact that at birth, William had a pinched nerve in his leg, which could have left him crippled for life. Well, if you really want to take him, I won't object, but why do you need a crippled child? Can't you take someone normal? Oscar said with disdain back then. Aren't you ashamed to say that? He's still so little. Don't you have an ounce of compassion in your heart? Emily said with tears in her eyes. Compassion? Do I have it or not? Of course, I do. But it's only compassion for myself. Who will take care of me, huh? Right, nobody. You, for example, are ready to take care of some handicapped boy instead of worrying about me, her husband retorted. Of course, Emily immediately suspected that she wouldn't find support in his eyes. But what's this? It's unthinkable. And can't you, little one, take care of yourself? This is a child, you know, he needs help. Maybe even corrective surgery is needed, exclaimed Emily. Well, if you need it, then you take care of it. I have other things to do, declared Oscar, slamming the door. To Emily's credit, it should be said that she carried out her plan. She obtained guardianship over 3-month-old William. Later on, she introduced the boy to one of the best specialists in pediatric orthopedic surgery, thanks to which the little one was able to finally rid himself of his ailment. Throughout all this time, Emily didn't tell William that he was adopted. Why upset him unnecessarily, especially when Emily loved him with all her heart and considered him the closest, the most dear? The late James reacted to his daughter's decision with restraint but understanding. He, too, had dreamed of having a grandson and therefore was happy with little William, as if he were his own. Oh, Dad, why did you leave this inheritance to that traitor? Where were your eyes looking? Emily thought sadly after washing the dishes and clearing the table. She didn't even suspect that her unfaithful husband Oscar was thinking about the same thing at that very moment. So, everything worked out great, huh? Well, did the old man transfer the whole business to me? Oscar asked with a smile to his new lover Sophie. The girl looked at him with surprise. Yes, you could say that. And be honest, how did you pull it off? Oscar smiled mysteriously. Oh, it was quite simple. I shared it with the notary and intercepted Albertson's will. He gave it to me himself. Basically, he was at death's door. He must have relied on me. He saw his son in me. And I, not being a fool, used my chance to the fullest. I forged the will, and I persuaded the notary. Sophie's eyes widened with surprise. But how did you do it? And why did the notary agree? Isn't this a criminal offense? Well, how did I do it? It was as easy as pie. This notary's son got into a car accident. It was a high-profile case. The investigation found him guilty, and I managed to get hold of the dashcam footage. What dashcam footage? The girl didn't understand. Oscar snorted in annoyance. Oh, you're so naive, Sophie. From the car's dashboard camera, which records the road. Almost every other driver has one. And I was lucky enough to find a witness to the accident. Well, I bought that recording and presented it to the notary. And did he agree? Sophie persisted. Well, of course, what else could he do? After all, this recording was the main trump card in the case against his son. He showed this recording in court, and all the charges against the guy were dropped immediately. And the real culprit of the accident disappeared. It's clearly visible in the video, Oscar said, looking at Sophie with a smile. She's still a good girl. Beautiful, slender. The kind that warms your heart. What are you planning to do next? I mean, with these assets of your father-in-law, she asked cautiously. Well, I don't know yet. Most likely, I'll sell the business for a higher price and put the money in the bank to earn interest. Wow, you're a real genius strategist and thinker. Sophie remarked proudly. Well, what can I say? Oscar smiled. At that moment, he felt like the master of life. After all, he cleverly handled that rich man, appeared at the right moment, and solved the issue of his will radically, without unnecessary words and paperwork. At the same time, Oscar didn't even think about why his father-in-law trusted him on his deathbed. Was there really no other choice? Oscar attributed this to the effects of painkillers, without which the deceased could not manage. Despite sleeping very poorly in her new place, after breakfast Emily decided to visit the local school to talk about work. Of course, Emily understood that it was summer outside, and she could only be enrolled in the staff at best in September. But, on the other hand, having a conversation on this topic clearly wouldn't hurt, and she understood that better than anyone else. School principal Thomas Brown was wary of her visit, as if expecting some catch. Who knows why this city woman decided to integrate herself into his team, maybe for the purpose of inspection. They love doing that, oh, they love it. Thomas Brown didn't want to lose his position. After all, he was the chief, and in the village, he was practically king and god. Everyone wanted to greet you when they met. After reviewing the documents, the principal pondered. On the one hand, he could easily reject Emily, finding a reason wouldn't be a problem. On the other hand, he feared that by doing so, he would make a potential enemy out of her. No, it's better for her to work under my supervision than to spread rumors when she returns to the city. And then they might send an inspection and find out that the funds for school repairs are being misused, thought Thomas Brown, and immediately said, addressing Emily. Well, your diploma and education don't raise any doubts in me that you'll fit well into our well-coordinated team. And to help you get acquainted, I suggest you work, so to speak, with a special contingent. What special contingent? Emily was surprised. Well, we have a boy here, Oliver Carroll. He's repeating the second grade due to poor performance. Oliver lives with his dad, a wheelchair user. He has no legs. It was a car accident that caused it. He used to be a tractor driver, and now his wife left him, so Michael is dealing with everything alone. Of course, the whole village helps as much as we can. And what's that got to do with me? Emily didn't catch the hint. Thomas Brown grimaced. But I'd like you to spend some extra lessons with Oliver so that by the next school year, he'll be more prepared. Ah, is that what you mean? Well, that's easy. I'm fine with that. Whenever you're ready, we can start right away. Emily breathed a sigh of relief. That's great. I think there's no need to delay this. Let's start today. I'll inform Oliver's father, and you can wait in the 7th room. He'll come quickly, he lives nearby. Emily shrugged and, agreeing with the principal's suggestion, left for the corridor. Fortunately, she didn't have to wait long. Soon, a breathless student burst into the room with a handful of notebooks in his hands. "Hello, may I? Is this where the extra lessons for 2nd graders take place?" "Yes, Oliver. But not for 2nd graders, for those falling behind in their studies." "That would be more accurate. My name is Emily. Let's start the lesson right now. Show me where you left off, or rather, before you went on vacation," Emily began in a pleasant, welcoming tone. Oliver nodded in agreement and immediately showed the necessary page in the textbook. Watching as the boy solved problems and answered questions, Emily caught herself thinking that he wasn't as dumb as the school principal tried to portray him. Moreover, Oliver's knowledge was at an average level. So why was he held back for another year? Who did this sweet and quiet boy bother? Deciding to find out from Oliver himself, Emily cautiously began to ask questions. At first, he just closed up and flatly refused to talk about it. But then, as Emily began to talk about herself and her life, he noticeably perked up and became more candid. "My classmates make fun of me. They say my dad's a legless pirate. But he's not a pirate. My dad's good, you know? He could have collided with a car, but he swerved and fell into a ditch on his tractor. That's how he lost his legs. And I don't think your dad's bad either. On the contrary, if you don't mind, I can visit him after our lessons. My son is about your age, and right now, he's staying home with Grandpa George. So, what do you say?" Emily asked as gently as possible. "Okay. But my dad doesn't like guests, but he'll probably let you in. He mostly dislikes the principal. I often get into fights, so people come to my house," the boy agreed. "But why do you fight, Oliver? That's not good. And it doesn't bring any benefits. Just bad grades and behavior." The boy pouted in offense. "I'm defending my dad from those who laugh at him. He's a good carpenter, you know. He makes all sorts of boxes. Really interesting. A smart boy like you simply can't have a bad dad," Emily smiled. After conducting a total of 4 lessons with Oliver, she was pleasantly surprised by his knowledge. No, he definitely won't stay for another year. And we'll work on his behavior, she thought on her way to Oliver Carroll's home. As it turned out, the boy lived in a house located on the edge of the village. It looked much like the one Emily had recently moved into herself. Seeing a young man in a wheelchair, she was noticeably taken aback and slowed her pace. "What, son, got into trouble again?" Michael asked with concern in his voice, accustomed to such behavior from his son. "No, Dad, this is Emily Albertson, our new teacher. She came from the city with her son," exclaimed joyful Oliver. "Oh, well then, come in." "I just boiled the kettle," said the homeowner, changing anger to kindness. Emily smiled and accepted the offer. Truth be told, she didn't expect Mishka's father to be so kind and pleasant. In conversation, Michael was noticeably polite and didn't try to defend his son or vilify the school management for leaving him back another year. Seizing a moment, the man quietly said, "It's tough for my Oliver. Everyone picks on him, anyone who feels like it. It's understandable because of me. They laugh that I'm legless. But it's temporary. I'm saving up for prosthetics. The best ones, you know? So I can feel human again." Emily looked at Michael sympathetically. "I understand, how could I not? And I'll help Oliver and talk to the principal. It's wrong, the way they're picking on him." At that moment, Oliver returned to the kitchen to continue their tea party. Unnoticed by herself, Emily noted that Michael was very kind, a good man. He didn't press for pity or concessions. Not like Oscar, a pampered idiot who only thinks of himself, Emily caught herself thinking. Michael told her about his past life when he was a tractor driver and was considered one of the most useful people in the village. A village can't do without a tractor. When it snows heavily, you won't dig yourself out with a shovel, the man said with a characteristic twinkle in his eyes. Emily sat for a while longer and then began to gather her things to go home. At that moment, the phone in the young teacher's pocket vibrated, indicating an incoming call. Seeing the caller's name on the screen, Emily frowned. It was Oscar. What does he want? Mrs. Me and decided to call? Emily thought and decided not to answer. What, exactly, would they talk about? Discuss the inheritance news again? Everything was clear there. Oscar had already bypassed her in that regard. Well, let him enjoy his moment of glory and wealth. He has the right to it. The right of the winner. To Emily's surprise, Oscar wasn't satisfied with just one call and repeated the call several times. Maybe you should answer? What if it's something important? Michael asked, but Emily just shook her head. No, I don't want to. It's my husband, though we haven't divorced yet. Michael sighed sympathetically, then escorted the guest to the gate. Skillfully maneuvering the wheels of his wheelchair, he tried to appear normal and not draw attention to his ailment. Lord, life can be so unfair. What did he do to deserve all this? Such a good guy, and look at him. Emily thought, waving goodbye to Michael and Oliver. Walking down the street to her home, she noticed a red car from afar, one she had definitely seen before. No, this can't be. But is it really him again? Emily approached closer and realized that this car definitely belonged to Oscar. But what was he doing here? Emily's back was covered in sticky sweat. She didn't want to meet her ex-husband, even considering that they were still legally married. Even from a distance, Emily heard Oscar's distinctive voice, which she couldn't mistake even if she tried. Her ex-husband was acting provocatively, shouting at the boy who wasn't his son, who had made the mistake of going into the yard. George Blair tried to stand up for the boy, but of course, he couldn't stand up to Oscar. The businessman was furious. And Emily realized it immediately. Barely opening the gate, she immediately came face to face with her enraged husband. Ah, here comes Emily. Just what I needed. You're the one I need. And whoever I ask, nobody knows anything. What does that have to do with me? And why did you come here at all? Exclaimed Emily. Oscar smirked. Ha, and you're still asking? Do you know that your dad deceived me? Emily paled. How did he deceive you? What are you talking about, Oscar? Have you completely lost your mind? You're the one who inherited everything from the will, and I got nothing. Have you forgotten? No, darling, I haven't forgotten. But your old man always knew how to pull off various tricks. Quite the magician, huh? He planned everything in advance. So shortly before he left, he emptied the company's accounts. And also, his business is on the verge of bankruptcy. And what? Are you saying you didn't know about this? Oscar growled. Emily's eyes showed genuine bewilderment. Of course not. And did you think otherwise? Oscar shook his head mournfully. You're all lying, just like your old man. You were all liars. Can you imagine coming up with something like that? He outplayed me everywhere he could. Remember, I won't let this go. And if you don't return the money your father hid in secret accounts, you will regret it. Are you threatening me? What's my fault here? I'm hearing this from you for the first time, Emily said tearfully. But Oscar was not convinced. On the contrary, he behaved as if Emily already knew what her father had planned. After a dramatic pause, Oscar said something that made her uncomfortable. If you don't find the money, blame yourself, got it? I'll make sure William ends up in a children's home, and you'll lose your parental rights. Yes, and don't look at me like that, it will all happen as I said. At that moment, George Blair, who had been standing quietly on the sidelines until then, intervened in the conversation. I don't think you've chosen the right tactic, young man. Threatening a woman, especially a young mother, is unthinkable. Oscar's lips curled into a smile. And who's this old man? Your defender, is he? Well, nothing to say. He's useless. Anyway, Emily, look for the money, and if you don't find it, William goes straight to the shelter. I don't want to go to the children's home, Dad. Why are you doing this? And why are you hurting Mom? William exclaimed indignantly. What kind of father am I to you? What are you talking about? Do we have anything in common? Oscar retorted and headed towards his car, where, as it turned out, his mistress Sophie was sitting. Emily, on the other hand, was so shocked by her ex-husband's confession that she couldn't utter a word. Bitter tears streamed down her cheeks, and her hands trembled as if after a severe nervous shock. Don't take it too hard, Emily. He's lying through his teeth, like always. He doesn't have the guts to do something like that. He's just a little weasel. I've seen those types in my time. They can only threaten, especially women, George Blair remarked in a half-whisper. Thank you for your support. It means a lot to me, Emily stammered. But the elderly man just waved his hand. Oh, come on, don't mention it. And if that brute shows up again, I'll give him a good whack with a stick. Having calmed down a bit, Emily looked at the situation in a completely different light. It seemed that her late father had left Oscar a failing business without any financial support. But then where did the money from his accounts go? After all, in essence, Oscar inherited a bankrupt company with a bunch of debts and problems on board. Emily, of course, had known before that her father knew how to conduct business in such a way that the advantage always remained on his side. But to this extent, it was beyond her comprehension. Such a masterfully crafted scheme. Yes, James Albertson had done the impossible. However, Emily herself was indifferent to this. After all, she had no idea where her father's money was actually kept. And there simply weren't any people who could give a clear answer. But how was your first day at work, Emily? George Blair asked from across the table. Emily smiled. I think it went fine. I met Oliver Carroll and his dad, Michael, the one who used to work as a tractor driver. George Blair's face lit up instantly. I know him. Good guy. It's just too bad life hasn't been fair to him. He essentially became a victim of circumstances. If only he hadn't swerved the wheel that time, hadn't saved the car, he probably would have suffered less injury. Emily sighed sadly. Truth be told, she felt very sorry for Michael, who had ended up in such a difficult situation. But what could she do? In the grand scheme of things, nothing. Except help Oliver with his studies, so that the boy could prepare properly for September 1st. Thinking about Oliver warmed her heart noticeably. Such a kind, smart boy. Just looking at him made her soul rejoice. And the principal was good too. He had enrolled Oliver for the second year. No, it wouldn't be like that. Oh, if only Emily knew that at that very moment the principal was thinking the same thing. Thomas Brown had been in this field for years, and therefore feared anything that could even indirectly harm him. He was most afraid of any inspection that could lead to him being given a country house, the construction of which used part of the materials allocated for school repairs. Truth be told, Thomas Blair was quite happy with the idea that the school would be disbanded in the near future and he would be transferred to another educational institution. And he didn't care at all how Oliver Carroll would get there, considering that his dad didn't have his own car. But Oscar was facing real problems. The late James Albertson cleverly hooked him when he asked his son-in-law to pass the will on to the notary. The experienced businessman immediately noticed a mysterious gleam in his eyes and decided to take a risk. As a result, Oscar found himself burdened with problems he had never even suspected before. The late's creditors demanded repayment of the debt, and competitors were ready to take over the company for next to nothing. Oscar was the scapegoat in the truest sense of the word. Now, after inheriting, all the threads led to him. And he couldn't turn the situation around, since he himself had forged the will in hopes of appropriating the assets of the deceased businessman. But in reality, everything turned out to be quite different. The company's accounts were empty as Swiss cheese, and all the employees of the company could do was helplessly throw up their hands. And that's when Oscar realized that he had fallen into a real trap, one from which he couldn't escape alone. Naturally, he had no intention of petitioning to deprive Emily of parental rights. And what was the point, when she probably really didn't know anything about the whereabouts of the money? 3 days passed, during which Emily worked with Oliver extra and visited his father. With Emily's arrival, Michael noticeably perked up. Joyful sparks lit up in his eyes. It was as if he was coming out of a stupor, starting to joke, smile. To Emily's delight, the changes affected not only Michael but also his son. Gradually, Oliver transformed from an ugly duckling into a beautiful swan, who was no longer afraid of circumstances and life's problems. Perhaps what the boy lacked was exactly that, confidence in himself and support. "I believe in you. Don't pay attention to your classmates. Soon they'll envy you and consider you a leader. Just don't give up, keep studying. And also, please, be more restrained and don't rush to use your fists," Emily said sincerely during the break between classes. "I'll try my best. Though I'm not sure how far I'll go, but I'll hang in there," the boy modestly replied. Seeing that the new teacher posed no threat to him, the school principal noticeably relaxed. Now he was no longer afraid of inspections and could continue building his country house overlooking the forest and lake. Meanwhile, Oscar, battling the avalanche of problems that had befallen him, left Emily alone for a while, which greatly relieved her. One day, returning home from work, she noticed a black SUV parked by the gate. Has Oscar returned again? And why in a different car? Where did he get the money for such purchases? Did he sell his father's company at auction? Emily thought. But when the young teacher approached closer, a gray-haired man in his 50s with the appearance of an office clerk came out to meet her. "Emily Albertson?" the stranger asked. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you?" The man smiled and immediately switched to an informal tone of conversation. "I am the attorney for your late father, James Albertson. The thing is, he instructed me to personally hand over to you the account details where the money is kept. The accounts are completely transparent, and the tax authorities will have no claims against them. The money is intended solely for you. And it has nothing to do with your spouse." "Ex-spouse," Emily corrected the guest in a muffled voice. "Well, yes, precisely, ex-spouse. I don't mind such wording. And I also have to give you an envelope. I don't know what's in it, but your father handed it to me shortly before his death. And James Albertson himself scheduled the date of our meeting with you. Not a day earlier, not a day later," the office clerk concluded. With trembling hands, Emily took the packet of business documents with the bank account details. She then put the envelope in the side pocket of her blouse to open it later. Having completed his mission, the man bid farewell politely and got into his car. Emily, with trembling legs, approached a bench leaning to one side and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from her father, which began with the following words. "My dear little daughter, if you are reading these lines, it means I am no longer alive. I apologize in advance for all this circus with the will, but I had no other choice. I had to finally dot all the I's to expose your husband, Oscar. By handing him my will, I am 99% sure he will try to forge it and turn the situation in his favor. Fortunately, I took care of it, and Oscar won't get anything. I passed on to him a failing business that will only bring problems and make him realize the mistake he made by betraying you. As for you, I leave you savings that many can only dream of. Use them wisely. For your own good and for the sake of our grandson, William. Your dad, James." Sitting on the bench, Emily reread the letter over and over again. "Oh God, is this all true?" she sobbed. Tears streamed down her cheeks when she found a photograph at the bottom of the envelope, showing herself. Only as a child. In a light dress with daisies and sandals on bare feet. "Mom, why are you crying? Did something happen? Did Dad hurt you again?" asked her son, approaching from behind with concern. Emily turned around, a sweet smile playing on her lips. "No, William, everything's fine. We just won't be poor anymore. And we'll be able to do everything to succeed. Wow! Can we build a store here? Like the one in town. And definitely a playground and a water park. The boy exclaimed happily. Of course, we can. We just need to wait a little, Emily replied. From that day on, their lives truly changed. Firstly, Emily allocated part of the funds to repair the village school, which greatly upset its director. Thanks to Emily's intervention, all the machinations of Thomas Brown were exposed, who only thought of his own benefit. Learning that the school would get a second chance, George Blair couldn't hold back his tears. Hugging Emily, the elderly man cried and thanked fate for bringing him together with the daughter of the late James. Emily didn't forget about Michael either, who received an invitation to one of the best prosthetic centers to choose the necessary model. Emily, thank you so much. I don't even know how to thank you, the man said with difficulty, restraining his excitement. She smiled and looked at Oliver peeking out of the window, as if saying to him, who turned out to be right. That's right, me and no one else. Oliver smiled back and ran out onto the street to hug his beloved teacher. Tears filled Emily's eyes as the little boy expressed his gratitude. Since Thomas Brown was fired immediately after his machinations were exposed, it was quite logical to question who would be the new principal. And here the villagers were unanimous in their opinion, only Emily, no one else. But no, how can this be? I have no experience at all, I've only just been hired, she murmured embarrassedly. But George Blair was more than insistent. Agree, Emily, don't be stubborn, we won't find a better principal. You're simply made for this job, and people trust you. You even allocated so much of your own money for repairs, he insisted. Emily smiled shyly, then thanked everyone present for their trust. Wow, my mom is now the school principal. William exclaimed joyfully, but Emily immediately reprimanded him. Don't get too excited, buddy. I won't give you any slack. Don't even count on it. I'll ask you for materials just like from everyone else. Knowledge is light, you know? It's not knowledge, it's darkness, Oliver quipped with a smile. Emily turned around and instantly saw Michael holding his son's hand. He stood. And not only stood, but could also move, walking with a cane. Emily was almost overwhelmed with surprise. Could Michael have recovered so quickly? All this seemed unreal to her. About 3 months after these events, Emily and Michael got married. By local standards, it was quite modest, but the newlyweds didn't need more. And the most important thing was that they were able to find each other in an unremarkable village where such miracles happened very rarely. As for Oscar, it was known only that he had finally gone bankrupt and lost everything he stole from his late father-in-law. As it turned out, Emily paid off the company's debts and bought a controlling stake in the auction almost for nothing. By that time, they were already divorced, and Oscar got nothing from this deal. Left with nothing, he quickly descended, selling his car and most of his personal belongings along with his jewelry. Stepmother Olivia also didn't get anything good after her husband left. It was all the fault of her lover, who cleaned out the willful beauty completely. But in the village school, they made such a good repair that now the classroom was overcrowded with students. After all, students came from all the surrounding villages, for which Emily even had to send her own school bus along the route. George Blair was incredibly happy about this because he had devoted most of his life to work in this school. Watching the children rushing to school with their backpacks, he thanked Emily and Michael for giving the village a second life.